The leadership of those peaceful student-led protests on campuses like Columbia, Yale, Berkeley, and many others.
Representative Ocasio-Cortez in New York, I learned a long time ago, listen to that lady.
Yesterday, celebrating Earth Day, two elderly men were wandering around the lawn of the White House. It was Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, but we were all given the treat of seeing Joe ushered around by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, holding his hand. She looked like the visiting angels nurse in her scrubs, helping this old guy to the bathroom, unless he's actually wearing an adult diaper, which I hope he is actually at this point after that ugly scene at the Vatican. You remember. Anyway, here's what it looked like.
Condemn the anti-Semitic protests! Mr. President, what's your message to the protest?
What's the hand-holding sort of creepy sexual harassment thing going on there? It looks weird. It looks way too affectionate, especially considering Joe Biden's past behaviors with young women. What it was not nearly as untoward as you think, because I doubt AOC would have allowed it. No, that was actually physical help. That was AOC actually physically propping him up. She eventually let him sit down and play a game of checkers with Bernie Sanders, and both of them nodded off to sleep with drool coming down their chin. And she took the microphone because, let's face it, someday she'll be our president standing behind that podium. And here's what she had to say, not just about Earth Day, but she decided to throw down and take the side of the pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic protesters on college campuses, because they're the shining lights of our society, don't you know?
It is especially important that we remember the power of young people shaping this country today, of all days, as we once again witness the leadership of those peaceful student-led protests on campuses like Columbia, Yale, Berkeley, and many others.
Super peaceful at Columbia, right? You saw all the images of how Jewish students and Jewish professors, we showed you this yesterday on the show, literally are locked out of their own campus, the campus they work on, or the campus they pay, what, $90,000 a year for the privilege of getting an education on. It may have been peaceful in AOC's eyes yesterday, but that's only because Jews weren't allowed. You know what we need to do? The Columbia administration came up with a great idea. We're going to round up all the Jews, and we're going to put them in one space, and we'll put a fence around it to protect them. But we got to come up with a way to identify the Jewish students and Jewish professors from the let's call us the normal people. So maybe we should put a gold star on them. They can wear that around as they're inside their little fenced-in area to protect them. It's to protect them, don't you know? That's what we're seeing right now. And on that peaceful Yale campus that AOC was just describing, a young Jewish girl from the journalism department covering the protests as a reporter got harassed by a pro-Hamas, pro-terrorist protester waving a Palestinian flag in her face, stabbing her in the eye with the flag stick. That's the peaceful protests we're looking at, as they're chanting that they want 1,000 more October 7th to finish the job, as they're chanting for bombing of Tel Aviv. That's the peaceful protest that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was talking about. And her patient, the person that she's the caregiver for yesterday, Joe Biden, when she was done praising and celebrating the terrorist sympathizers and celebrants on our college campuses, well, Joe Biden, it was his turn to praise her.
And Representative Ocasio-Cortez in New York, I learned a long time ago, listen to that lady. Listen to that lady. We're going to talk more about another part of the world, too, real quickly.
What exactly does that mean, other than maybe about Israel? Because, of course, they were talking about Earth Day and climate change and all of that. So is he having some kind of summit with AOC about what our appropriate response in Israel should be? Yeah, maybe so. because when the event was over, a reporter shouted a question to him because, of course, he doesn't take any organized questions from reporters. Oh, please, that's for the little people. He's Joe Biden, don't you know? He only takes planned, prepared, scripted questions and answers from reporters. But one reporter asked, what do you say about the anti-Semitic protests on college campuses? And, well, he certainly is listening to AOC because here's what he said.
Condemn the anti-Semitic protests on college campuses.
I condemn the anti-Semitic protests. That's why I've set up a program to deal with that. I also condemn those who don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians.
Okay, let's break that down for a minute, shall we? That's a hell of an answer that is quite revealing.
I condemn the anti-Semitic protests. That's why I've set up a program to deal with that.
Is there anything more Washington, D.C. than that? Yeah, I don't like those anti-Semitic protests. That's why I've set up a blue ribbon commission to handle it. I've set up a committee. I've set up a program. You know who's on the committee that's supposed to address the anti-Semitic protests on our streets right now and on our college campuses? Representatives from CARE. CARE is the Council on American Islamic Relations. CARE was actually an unindicted co-conspirator after 9/11 for having connections with terrorist organizations. You want to address anti-Semitic protests and behavior and violence in this country, and you put representatives of CARE on your commission? That tells us how unserious you are. In fact, it tells us that you're actually not wanting to do anything about anti-Semitic protests and violence in this country. So that's part one. Part one. But then he says,
I also condemn those who don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians.
That's you. That's me. You know, if you support Israel right now, if you actually think that Israel has a right to defend herself, if you think that we, the United States of America, shouldn't get in the way of this war, and let the leaders of Israel do what they need to do to protect their borders and protect their citizens by eliminating a terrorist organization. Well, according to Joe Biden, you don't understand what's going on to the Palestinians right now. You know what? I have an inkling of what's going on with the Palestinians right now. Here's what I understand about what's going on with the Palestinians right now. The Palestinian people, when given the right to elect their own government and their own leadership in Gaza, elected Hamas, a terrorist organization, a known terrorist organization funded by the Iranians. Well, and by us, technically. They elected Hamas. They stood back and allowed Hamas to take all of the humanitarian aid and all of the money that was coming into Gaza, whatever it was, and redirect it to rockets to shoot over to Israel to kill as many innocent Israelis as possible. They redirected all of that money from UN aid and from the United States humanitarian aid, redirected it to a network of tunnels so that their terrorist armies could hide when the inevitable retaliation came against the Hamas terrorists. They stood back and cheered while the October 7th attacks occurred, and they continue to support Hamas to this day. Yes, I have a really good understanding of what's going on with the Palestinian people. And there's one more thing I understand about the Palestinian people, Mr. President, that this entire thing would be over as soon as two things happen. Number one, our hostages are released, the American citizens that are being held and sexually assaulted and terrorized on a daily basis, now hundreds of days, 6 months after this attack, and the Israeli hostages as well. Number one, release those hostages, and number two, surrender. Just surrender. When will this war stop? When will the aggression and violence stop? When you surrender. When you surrender. We understand perfectly well what's going on with the Palestinian people. But make no mistake, that statement from Joe Biden, I condemn the anti-Semitic behavior and I condemn those who don't understand what's going on with the Palestinian people. That's his very decent people on both sides moment. That's his equivocation. That's his, hey, both sides have a point here. Those people who are cheering on Hamas on a daily basis, they're very fine people. Now, as we've already discussed on other episodes of this show, and you can go ahead and look in the archives to find it, the very fine people on both sides was a lie from the beginning. Donald Trump never said that about the neo-Nazis and white nationalists in Charlottesville. But the media has lied about it up until this point. But give me a break. Joe Biden has literally said exactly that about legitimate, actual Nazi-like pro-Hamas terrorists and pro-terrorist protesters that are waving the terrorist flag, keeping their faces covered, and bullying and intimidating Jewish students, innocent Jews on American campuses right now. Joe Biden just threw American Jews under the bus because he thinks he needs to do that to win Dearborn, Michigan, so that he can save his lamentable political career. It's disgusting. It's despicable. We've got Charlottesville happening daily right now for real, because Charlottesville was never real. Charlottesville was a bunch of yahoos that live in their mother's basement who bought tiki torches at Home Depot and went one Friday night to protest the tearing down of a statue of Robert E. Lee. That's a hell of a lot different than what we're seeing right now every day across this country. He doesn't care about Jewish Americans. He doesn't care about Jewish students. He doesn't care about anti-Semitism. He doesn't care about hate. He doesn't care about violence. He doesn't care about our ally, Israel. He cares about getting reelected. That's what you saw. And I hope everybody gets it. Meanwhile, the president of Colombia still has not stepped down. She hasn't resigned. She's nowhere to be seen. No press conferences, no call to action, no rallying support with security and police or anything. But what we have seen of her is what she had to say just 2 months after the September 11th attacks. She was at some event, and, well, this is what she had to say about terrorism.
So it's not, you'll always have individuals who will have extreme views. But what's really troubling in the region is that there's actually quite a broad base of society which has some sympathy for the terrorists, not so much because they approve of their methods, but it's a form of protesting against a system which is not delivering for them on the economic or the political front.
There you go. So really, if you think about it, terrorism is just another form of protest. And you can understand why people would support Al-Qaeda. This is 2 months after 3,000 people were murdered in cold blood at the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon. This is while the bodies of those who were buried alive and incinerated alive in the rubble of the World Trade Center were still being recovered at Ground Zero. And here she is, making excuses, equivocating, and saying, well, listen, you kind of have to understand Al-Qaeda's point here. Terrorism, even if we don't like the tactics, it really is just another form of protest. And surprisingly, on the other side of that same coin, the protests that we're seeing in Columbia University right now under her watch, it's really just another kind of terrorism. My heart doesn't break for Columbia University or the Board of Regents or the donors there or even the students there because, well, they got exactly what they wanted when they hired this moral idiot to be their president. And by the way, they got exactly what they wanted when they picked the students that they picked to attend those universities. You'll remember a couple of years ago, famously, a student got accepted to Stanford after delivering an essay that was merely the phrase Black Lives Matters copied and pasted 100 times over. That was the essay on his college admission for Stanford, and Stanford accepted him with open arms. They've got the university administration that they've always wanted. They knew exactly who they were hiring when they hired them. And they've got the student body they wanted because this is who they've picked to be the young, fresh faces of the intellectual elite in our Ivy League campuses.